Here is the most uncomfortable thought you will ever sit with. If something created everything, then what created that something? And if your answer is that nothing created it, that it simply always existed, then why couldn't the universe itself have always existed? You see, the moment you bring in a creator to explain existence, you haven't solved the mystery. You've only pushed it back by one step, and that single step, that one quiet logical move, unravels everything. Stay with me, because this goes much deeper than you think. Picture yourself somewhere you've already been. You're a child, maybe 5 or 6, lying on the grass, staring up at the night sky. The stars are endless. The darkness between them feels thick, almost solid. And your mind, still young, still unfiltered, asks the question every human being has asked since the first one looked up. Where did all of this come from? Maybe your parents said God made it. Maybe your teacher said the Big Bang. Maybe your grandmother lit a candle and whispered a prayer. But notice something strange. Every single answer across every culture, every century, every religion, every science eventually hits the same wall. And where did that come from? This isn't a trick. This isn't philosophy being clever for its own sake. This is the most honest question a human mind is capable of asking. Because causality, the idea that everything has a cause, is the foundation of how we understand reality. Every time something happens, something else made it happen. A ball rolls because you kicked it. Rain falls because clouds formed because water evaporated. Water evaporated because the sun warmed it. Cause, effect, all the way back. And when you follow that chain long enough, the mind starts to feel a kind of vertigo. It reaches for solid ground and finds nothing. In that moment of falling, many people grab the oldest answer in human history. There must be a first cause, something that started it all. Something outside the chain, something eternal, all-powerful, uncreated. They call it God, and that instinct is deeply human. It isn't stupid. It isn't primitive. It comes from the same place that drives every scientist, every philosopher, every curious child staring at the stars. The need to understand. The refusal to let the mystery just float there, unanswered. But here is where we have to slow down. Because the solution people reach for, this idea of a divine, eternal, uncreated creator, when you press on it gently, when you ask it the same questions it was meant to answer, something strange happens. It breaks. Here is the question no one wants to ask out loud. If God created the universe, and God has always existed, uncreated, eternal, needing no cause of his own, then you have already accepted the idea that something complex, something conscious, something with will and intention and power can exist without a cause. But if you have accepted that, why apply it only to God? Why not apply the same logic to the universe itself? This isn't a rhetorical trick, it's a genuine logical demand. You can't use it always existed, it needs no cause, as your explanation for a creator, while in the same breath insisting the universe could not have always existed, that it must have had a cause. That isn't reasoning, that's special pleading. Accepting a rule for everything except the one thing you want to protect from it. And it gets stranger when you ask a second hidden question. What kind of thing is God, exactly? Most theological descriptions tell us God is infinite, all-knowing, all-powerful, present everywhere, existing outside of time. Now think about what those words actually mean. To be all-knowing means to contain, in some sense, all information. To be all-powerful means to be capable of every possible action. To exist outside of time means to not be subject to the very structure that gives cause and effect their meaning. These aren't simple attributes, they are staggeringly complex ones. And here's what physics has taught us, quietly and persistently across the last 100 years. Complexity does not appear from nothing. Order does not precede disorder. Consciousness, as far as every shred of evidence shows, emerges from simpler physical processes. It does not produce them. So when someone says, God has always existed, they are asking you to believe that the most complex, most ordered, most information-rich entity imaginable just was, with no process, no emergence, no cause. And they are asking you to accept this while calling it an explanation. That is the hidden question, and it refuses to stay hidden. To be fair, let's take the strongest version of the argument for a creator, because ideas deserve to be met at their best, not their worst. Philosophers call it the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And that cause, by definition, must be something that did not begin, something eternal, something outside of space and time. It's clean, it's logical. and it has convinced some of the greatest minds in history. The physics underneath it is real enough. The universe, as far as our best measurements show, did have a beginning, or at least a boundary. Roughly 13.8 billion years ago, space itself was unimaginably dense and hot. Time, as we measure it, may not have existed before that moment in any meaningful sense. Run the equations of general relativity backward, and they approach a singularity, a point where the laws of physics we know stop making predictions. So yes, there is a genuine scientific mystery here. The universe does appear to have a starting point, and the question of what caused that starting point is not answered by physics yet. That gap is real. Into that gap, theology steps and says, the cause was God. On the surface, that sounds almost reasonable. You have a mystery. You have a proposed solution. Fine. But here is where the surface explanation runs into trouble. When scientists encounter a gap in knowledge, they treat it as a gap, an open question, a place to investigate further, a signal that we need better tools and deeper thinking. What they do not do, what they cannot do and remain scientists, is fill that gap with an entity that is itself unexplained and then declare the mystery solved. Because filling a mystery with a bigger mystery is not an explanation, it is the appearance of one. The universe's origin is mysterious. We can admit that fully. But trading one mystery for an even more complex one, a conscious, all-powerful, eternal being, and calling that an answer, is where the logic begins to quietly collapse. Here is where the real twist arrives, and it comes not from philosophy, but from mathematics and physics themselves. Quantum cosmology, refined over decades, has shown something staggering. In quantum mechanics, nothing is not what we think it is. The classical idea of nothing, a pure void, an absolute absence of everything, turns out to be physically unstable. Quantum fields, even in their lowest possible energy state, fluctuate. They vibrate. They produce virtual particles that pop in and out of existence. The vacuum of space is not empty. It is a seething form of activity. And crucially, quantum mechanics tells us that systems do not need a classical cause to move from one state to another. At the quantum level, the very concept of cause dissolves at the edges. But here is the deeper twist, the one that rewires how you see the entire debate. When we talk about God as an explanation, we are smuggling in a specific assumption that the universe follows the logic of everyday causality, that things don't happen without reasons, without agents, without prior states. That assumption works beautifully at human scales. Billiard balls, falling apples, exploding stars. But when we reach the boundaries of the universe, the Planck scale, the quantum foam, the first fractions of the first second, that logic breaks down, not metaphorically. The equations stop producing clean causal chains. Time itself becomes uncertain. The word before may lose its meaning entirely. So when someone asks, what caused the Big Bang? They are importing a framework that may simply not apply at that scale. They are asking a question that sounds grammatically valid, but may be physically meaningless. Like asking, what is north of the North Pole? And this is the twist. The God hypothesis does not just fail to answer the question. It assumes the question makes sense when physics strongly suggests it may not. The universe may not need a cause. Not because of philosophy, but because causality itself may be an emergent feature of the universe, not a rule that governs its birth. Step away from the equations for a moment and imagine something with me. You are standing at the edge of all existence. Not in space, because space is part of the universe, and we are imagining the boundary of the universe itself. Not in time, because time is a dimension woven into the fabric of space-time, and we are standing before that fabric was woven. You are, in this thought experiment, at the true edge, nothing behind you. The universe in front of you, not yet born. Now ask yourself, what is here? If you say God, then God is here, this eternal, conscious, all-powerful being existing in a timeless void. But immediately your mind hits a wall. If there is no time, there is no sequence of events. If there is no sequence of events, there is no decision. If there is no decision, there is no intention. If there is no intention, there is no act of creation. A timeless being cannot decide to do something because deciding is a process. It has a before and an after. It requires time. So either God exists in time, in which case where did that time come from? Or God exists outside of time, in which case God cannot act, cannot will, cannot create. You see the problem. Now try the alternative. Imagine standing at that edge and finding not a conscious being, but something more like a quantum field. Something without personhood, without intention, without a plan. something that simply is in a state of pure potential. And out of that potential, as quantum mechanics allows, a fluctuation occurs, not caused, not intended, not designed, just possible, and therefore, eventually, inevitable. The universe does not need permission to begin. It does not need a creator to approve its existence. In a universe governed by quantum probability, if something can happen, if the laws of physics permit it, then across enough possibility space, it will happen. No mind required, no intention required, no first cause required in the theological sense. And here is the most vertiginous part of this thought experiment. You are made of particles that emerge from that fluctuation. Your consciousness, your ability to ask this question right now, is the universe becoming aware of itself, not through design, through physics. That is either the most beautiful accident in all of existence, or it is something we do not yet have words for. But notice, it requires no author. Let's go deeper. Let's look at what physics actually says about the layers of reality, from the smallest scales to the largest, and see what we find when we go looking for a creator's signature. At the subatomic level, particles do not behave like little billiard balls obeying clean rules. An electron does not have a definite position until you measure it. It exists in a superposition of states, a smear of probability across space. This is not a limitation of our instruments. This is the actual nature of the electron. The universe at its most fundamental level is probabilistic, not deterministic. That matters enormously, because if the universe at its roots is probabilistic, if events happen without strict prior causes, then the entire logical structure of the God argument wobbles at its foundation. The argument says everything that begins to exist has a cause. Quantum mechanics says some things begin to exist without a cause in the classical sense. The argument was built for a Newtonian universe. We no longer live in one. Go one layer deeper, and you reach quantum field theory, the most precisely tested scientific theory in human history. In this framework, particles are not fundamental objects. They are excitations of underlying fields. The electron is a ripple in the electron field. The photon is a ripple in the electromagnetic field. These fields permeate all of space. They are not made of anything smaller. They simply are. And even in their ground state, their lowest possible energy, they still fluctuate. They are never truly at rest. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle forbids perfect stillness. Energy and time are linked in such a way that a perfectly quiet vacuum is forbidden by mathematics itself. Now go to the largest scale. The observable universe contains roughly 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy contains hundreds of billions of stars. The numbers grow so large, they stop being imaginable and become purely mathematical. And every atom, every star, every galaxy is governed by the same quantum fields, the same physical constants, the same mathematical laws. Here is what is striking. Those laws are the same everywhere. The speed of light, the charge of an electron, the gravitational constant, these values do not change from one corner of the universe to another. They are uniform across 93 billion light-years. Why? We don't fully know, but here is what we do know. That uniformity does not point to a personal, relational, prayer-answering God. It points to something far more abstract, more like mathematics itself having a kind of existence. And mathematics does not have intentions. Now let's take the widest possible view, zoom all the way out, then all the way in, and see what the universe looks like from the extremes. Start with the largest scale we can imagine. Cosmologists now have strong theoretical reasons to believe our universe may be just one of an enormous, possibly infinite number of universes. The multiverse is not science fiction. It emerges naturally from several independent branches of physics: inflationary cosmology, string theory's landscape, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. All of them point separately toward the same unsettling possibility. If the multiverse is real, then the question, why does this universe have the constants it has a very different answer than God tuned them. The answer becomes, because in an infinite array of universes, every possible combination of constants exists somewhere. We find ourselves in this one because this one permits the existence of beings capable of asking the question. This is called the anthropic principle, and it is not a circular argument. It is an observational filter. You cannot observe a universe that doesn't permit your existence. So naturally, any universe that contains observers will appear fine-tuned to permit observers. No tuner needed. Now zoom all the way in. Smaller than atoms, smaller than protons, down to the level where space itself becomes grainy. The Planck scale, 10 to the negative 35th of a meter. At that scale, the concepts of space and time themselves may not exist in any continuous sense. Some theories of quantum gravity suggest that space and time are emergent, that they arise from something more fundamental, the way temperature arises from the average motion of particles. If space and time are emergent, then asking what happened before the universe is like asking what is south of the South Pole. The question isn't unanswerable. It's malformed. It assumes a structure that doesn't exist at that level. And here, sandwiched between the cosmic enormity of the multiverse and the quantum graininess of space-time itself, is where the God hypothesis runs out of room. There is no place left to stand, no gap left to fill. Every gap that once sheltered the idea of divine intervention has either been filled by physics or reframed as a question that may not require an answer in the traditional sense. The universe does not look like something that was made. It looks like something that is, deeply, mathematically, inevitably. And that is far stranger and far more wonderful than anything a creation story has ever offered. So here is the big insight, the one that crystallizes everything. The concept of God, specifically the God of traditional theology, the personal creator, the intelligent designer, the being that exists outside time and space and wills the universe into existence, is not just unsupported by evidence. It is, in a very precise sense, logically self-defeating. Here is why. Any explanation worth the name must be simpler than the thing it explains. That is what explanation means. When Newton explained the motion of planets with a single equation, he replaced complicated observations with one simple underlying law. When Darwin explained the diversity of life with natural selection, he replaced the assumption of a designer with a simpler process. Good explanations reduce complexity, but introducing God increases complexity enormously. You begin with a mystery, the existence of the universe. You introduce an explanation, an eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful conscious being, but now you have a new mystery orders of magnitude more complex than the first. Where did this being's consciousness come from? How does it process infinite information? How does it act without time? How does it exist without space? You have not solved the problem of existence. You have doubled it and then hidden the second problem behind the word eternal. David Hume noticed this centuries ago. The physicist Victor Stenger spent a career formalizing it. The biologist Richard Dawkins called it the central argument. Any creator capable of designing the universe would have to be at least as complex as the universe itself, and therefore would require just as much explanation. An unexplained explainer is not an explanation, and this is not a hostile observation. It is not an attack on faith or on the deeply human need to find meaning. It is simply the demand that we apply our reasoning consistently, that we hold every proposed explanation, including the most ancient and most comforting ones, to the same standard. The universe is astonishing. Its existence is mysterious, its laws are breathtaking in their elegance, but the appropriate response to a mystery is not to conjure a bigger mystery and call it solved. The appropriate response is wonder and work. Let's sit with something for a moment before we reach the end, because this conversation is not just about logic. It is about what it means to be a conscious creature in an enormous, indifferent, mathematically governed universe. There is a certain kind of loneliness in the universe that physics describes. A universe with no author, no plan, no cosmic purpose written into its equations. A universe where you are a temporary arrangement of atoms that will one day disperse back into the void from which they came. That is a hard thing to hold, and maybe that is exactly why the God hypothesis has persisted in every culture, in every century. Not because it is logically sound, but because it is emotionally necessary. It makes the loneliness bearable. It gives the suffering meaning. It offers the terrifying impermanence of life a frame, a story within which it makes sense. These are not small things. These are the things that have held civilizations together. But here is what philosophy has quietly whispered for centuries, and what science now says out loud. You can have the wonder without the fiction. You can have the awe without the author. You can stand under the night sky and feel the full weight of existence, not diminished because it is purposeless, but amplified because it is real. A sunset is not less beautiful because we understand the scattering of light. A human life is not less meaningful because it was not designed. Love is not less real because it emerged from neurons rather than divine commandment. The universe does not need to be created to be extraordinary. It just needs to be. And when you truly absorb that, when you let the reality of it settle into your bones, you realize something remarkable. The universe, in producing you, produced something capable of understanding it. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. That is not a small miracle. Even if no miracles exist, here is where I want to leave you. Every atom in your body was forged inside a star. The carbon in your cells, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, every single one of these atoms was cooked in stellar fusion over billions of years and scattered across space when those stars exploded. You are, in the most literal sense, made of dead stars. And those stars were made of hydrogen. And that hydrogen was made in the first 3 minutes after the beginning of the universe, when the energy density was so high that protons fused spontaneously in the expanding fireball. And that fireball emerged from what? A quantum fluctuation, a probabilistic event at the boundary of time, something without intention, without consciousness, without design, and from that nothing that was not quite nothing. Through 13.8 billion years of physics came hydrogen, then stars, then heavier elements, then planets, then chemistry, then life, then neurons, then language, then the question you are asking right now. Where did all of this come from? The universe made you, and then, through you, it asked about itself. You are not separate from the universe, looking at it from outside. You are the universe, folded back upon itself, achieving self-awareness for a brief, impossible moment. The cosmos peering at its own reflection in the mirror of a human mind. There is no God in the equations, no signature in the constants, no author in the margins. But there is something vast, intricate, and almost incomprehensibly beautiful, a mathematical structure of such depth and elegance that entire human lifetimes are not enough to explore its edges. Call it what you want, but do not diminish it by making it small. Do not replace the genuine, dizzying, magnificent mystery of existence with a single word. Sit with the mystery. It is the most honest thing you can do.